Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Hot Mic Podcast. I'm Nathan Ivy, or should I say, Nate the Barbarian. We live in savage times. We don't need a hero, we need a barbarian. And back with the crew. Back with the crew, of course, as we are every Tuesday at 1 p.m. and Friday at 1 p.m. Sorry about that. Just got a little confused. Had my phone in the background. Every Tuesday and Friday, we come to you at 1 p.m. And today, as usual, I am not alone, joined by the crew. We got Phil Hemlich, Kevin Gordon, we got Kevin Aldridge, and Joe Mallory. We are scheduled to be joined by Ironetta Wright as well, but let's just get started. Fellas, welcome to Hot Mic. How are you?
Hey,
Great.
good to see you.
Good to see
Thanks for
everybody.
having me.
Absolutely, Joan. Thank you for the short notice. I was thinking last night, who else needs to be a part of this conversation? And then after seeing your quotes in the newspaper today, or really a couple days ago, I was like, yeah, let me reach out to Joe Mallory. So let's get straight into it, shall we? Let's talk about our first hot topic. Mika Owens is back in the news yet again. This week, her personal notes that she used in her process to choose the replacement for Reggie Harris on City Council was made public by the Inquirer. And it gave us a sort of a behind the scenes look into her thought process. And I just want to go straight into it. My question is, and I got a lot of thoughts on it, but my question to get to start off with is, without catching everybody up to speed, does this make her look better or worse? Because she's already been in the news for the last couple of weeks. Does this make her look better or worse? What do you think? And Joe, I want to come straight to you.
Okay, so this is what I suspected all along. I felt that the process was a charade. I thought it was a sham process, and I believe that she wanted the person that she picked from the beginning. And I think it was a disservice to all the people who were applying for the job, who interviewed for the job, and the esteemed council that she assembled. I thought it was a disservice to everyone involved that she had her person cherry picked, and we're just going through a process. So we're walking through this process for the optics and for public consumption. That was my opinion. And when these notes came out, some of the notes were disturbing, and you can't come to any other conclusion but to see that it was meant to bias the process. So if you read these notes and you're trying to come in with an open mind and you're going to give your feedback, there's no other conclusion you can come to after reading all these notes of who is a lean towards. And her words, not mine, day one. Someone who could go in there from day one. So I think it made it a little worse that you got to peek behind the curtain to see the smoke and mirrors that was set up.
Was there anything else in her notes that came out that stuck out to you or you have an issue with?
Well, it was interesting that the other African American who is an attorney and got great credentials, who was basically a department head for the city of Cincinnati, how somehow his inside job that he had, so knowing the city administration and being in there, his credentials and his experience with the city wasn't good enough. But the person she chose, his experience at the city solicitor's office, he's got that inside relationship and he knows these people and he knows how this works. So you put this in here on this one person. So, okay, well, this is not the person that I should be looking at. It should be this other person over here who is ready to go day one, and he works well with everyone. And one thing I want to say, if you're in there as a council person, you're not in there to represent the administration. You're in there to represent the community. You're supposed to be the constituents' voice. You're a representative of the community, not of the city, not of the administration. So trying to go and control all that, like, do they get along with the people on the third floor? Do they get along with these people over here? Hey, anybody who gets elected, you have to be able to work together in a democratic fashion for the best interest. You have to work together whether you like the person or not. So that's my comments, and I'll respond to any question anybody has.
Well, let me bring Phil into this because we've been having these conversations for weeks now. And I know a few weeks back when Evan Nolan was sworn in, you turned your back. And I know that Phil has had an issue with that. Here's a great place to talk about it. Phil, I'll give you the.
Well, thanks, Nathan, and Joe. I will say it's good to have you here, and give my best to your three brothers, who I've been working with for quite a few years. Uh, First of all, I'll just say on the point you raised, I think the notes reflected that she was very thoughtful and I thought her reasoning made good sense. And I would also say, having served on city council, then I didn't always do such a good job of this, but being able to have a good relationship with the people who work for the city administration, I've always found was a positive thing. But let's get down to the real thing. You acted, I would call it a way that was disrespectful, but whatever it was your position. Apparently, that if there is a black person on council and they leave, you have to replace them with a black person. Which to me, if it was done by if it was a white person and they said, "Oh, we got to have another white guy," to me that would be racist. And I guess my question to you is, since apparently you feel that it has to be a tit for tat, are you saying that if it had been a white person and they were replaced by a black person, would you object to that?
I'm an advocate for representation, the black representation. So when you look at the mission of the NAACP, it's very clear, and it's in alignment with what I've said in the past, and it's about black representation. That's what my statement was about. It was in alignment with our mission. And let's go back to you talking about the previous person who was appointed. When Greg Landsman left, they appointed another white guy, and that's what they did. And when you talk about how the party chooses,
so you're saying they did that based on race, you think, or just because they thought he was the best person?
I think they did it based. There's a white guy leaving, a white guy. This is precedents have been set in the past because the Democratic Party tries to create a diverse slate and a diverse council, right? So when they try to have diversity and all voices represented, that's how things have been done. And if you go back in all the other appointments, that's how things have been done.
So you're saying, just to be clear, your interest is not in what is right or what is a racial justice. You're not interested in that. You're just interested in getting as many African Americans in that position as possible. That's all you care about. Is that right?
I care about what the community cares about. And the first 5 people who were the highest vote getters in the last election were all black people. The first 5, the community, this is what the community wanted. And I'm saying,
so you're saying the community wants black people based on that. That's what the community wants. If the community wanted white, let me ask you this. If the community put 5 white people there, are you saying, well, the community wants white people on there? Is that what you're saying?
Well, we're used to having all white representation. So this is a change when we finally have some people who are of color who can represent.
What's the percentage? I mean, when I was on city council, I think it was about maybe out of 9, I think we had 3 or 4 African Americans. How many is enough so you feel it's just or fair? What's the number?
I think the community
assuming
chose the majority.
Assuming we're going to play the game, that we have to have a percentage of a particular race. Which the problem is, if you go what is that number you're saying that you want, or is it just everybody?
I'm sticking to what the results of the election spoke to in the most recent election. I'm speaking to the first 5 vote getters out of 9 were all African American.
And if the first 5 were white, you'd be advocating for a white person then to take his place. Is that right?
I'm not advocating for the white persons to be replacing a white person. If the community said that and whoever's in control would appoint one, I wouldn't say anything. But the fact remains. So
you're saying if there were 5 white people there that were the top vote getters, you're saying that you don't think it should be a white. You would say it should be a white person that's appointed based on that last vote total of 5 white people.
I wouldn't be raising much hell as I'm raising right now about the people saying this is what they want, and you have a majority who was determined by the people. The first 5 were African American, and that's what the people said. Here we got an opportunity to replace an African American who had left with another African American, and the process, she was the designee to choose the person who would replace Reggie Harris. Okay, that was her choice. We didn't have to go through all these charades and all this sham of a process for her to come to that
What's? I
conclusion.
don't understand. What's the sham? She obviously thought it out. She had very good reasons, I thought, for her choice and her reasons against. What's the
I don't have a
sham? I don't
problem.
get
Look,
that.
Phil, I don't have a problem with her thoughtful reasoning, like you said. I don't have a problem with that. But I have a problem with it appearing like you have a wise counsel that you're going to take counsel from, and you're going to give you feedback when you taint the process and you give them notes on each candidate before you even get to vet them.
Yeah, but how do you know she didn't talk to different
Yeah.
people? It seemed to me that in her notes, it reflected the fact that she had talked to a variety of people in the city administration and out about these
She
people. So
spoke to
I don't
those
get
people,
where you
but
say it's a sham. I don't
when you
get
have a
that.
process, it's supposed to be unbiased, and you got these people. You can't give some people the answers to the test and say, "Hey, we're going to have a test." But
Well,
hey,
I'm sorry,
by the way,
what's
here's
the
the answer to
bias?
the test.
What is the bias you're talking about?
Well,
The-
here can I just interject here for a second, because I know Phil and Joe could go back and forth on this all day. I mean, look, let's just face the reality of most of these processes. Okay, the reality is that there are very few processes that you go into where they are, unless you're talking about some kind of like nationwide search or something like that, where folks probably don't already have in mind a candidate or someone that they would like to tap for a position. I see this all the time in corporate America, everywhere that I've worked, where there's been a position opening that might go to an internal candidate. They have someone in mind that they would like for that position, but they still go through a process. Now, the reason why you go through that process is because even though you might have in mind the person that you want, you could be surprised. Somebody could come in front of you and they may defy your expectations or be that much higher than the person that you had in mind. So I don't think just because Mika Owens may have had Evan Nolan in mind going into it that it made the process a sham, because you do open yourself up to the idea, hey, maybe somebody that comes forth might surprise me, might change my mind about this person that I'm going into the process, maybe a little bit biased, or maybe saying this person has a slight edge coming into it. So I won't go so far as to saying that the whole process might have been a sham just because she liked somebody going into the process. I don't think that that's uncustomary. I think that that happens in pretty much most hiring situations or appointment situations. You go into it saying, hey, it'd be nice if I could get this person or someone like this. That happens there are very few cases where I think that doesn't happen. The unfortunate thing for Mika Owens in this situation, as with any situation, hey, look, I'm just gonna be honest. If our inside our head thoughts or conversations that we have when we're trying to suss through situations were made public, I think we would all be embarrassed sometimes about some of the things that might come out, or things that we might have to say about people in an honest assessment of how we see them and how they're going to fit into something. I would love to see the person who would say in an honest moment, if they put an X-ray up to some conversations that they've had about folks, that they would want that to be made public. And so I think, unfortunately for Mika Owens in this situation, that's what happened to her, is that her thoughts and her vetting of what she thought about the candidates were made public. And of course, the people that those comments were made about, people who support those comments or disagree, they're going to have their thoughts on that. And
Yeah,
I
by,
think
by the way, on that
Kevin,
same
hey, by
line,
the
if
way,
I may say, on that same line, uh, frankly, I was surprised how, frankly, above board her reasoning was. I mean, my recollection in the old days is that you just basically, the party chairman told you who it's going to be. And no, that's how it was in my party. And that's it. Okay. Hers actually seemed fairly legitimate, but I do want to raise one thing that relates to
well,
what
hold
Joe
on, Phil.
said.
Like, how could it be refreshing when every note and thought that you had in there is leading to one person? So how does that
She's a
feel like
human being. She knows these people. Are you saying you
how?
want somebody to
But
make the choice? She
you got
knows
a
these
wise
people. She
counsel.
has
You
knowledge.
have a wise counsel. They don't need you to give the cheat notes. You have a wise counsel. They had certain questions they asked each person. Okay. So you want to have a fair playing ground. You have all the people ask the same questions, but then when you put your personal notes in there and everything is slanted to come to one conclusion, that is a biased and tainted process. I don't care who
Well,
you are.
Let
leading
me
you
say
to
this
what?
right now. If somebody asked you, Joe, let's say a new appointment opening happened on city council or wherever, or even in your organization, either one, and you would likely not go into that situation with a totally blank mind. You know these people, and you can't help but know these people or know about them. To me, it's perfectly normal to have opinions on this kind of thing.
You're
But
right,
I
but it's
do want to
not
go.
perfectly normal. It's not perfectly normal to assemble a whole cast of people in the community to say, like, I'm weighing on these people's expertise and experience and their professional opinions to give me their feedback on what they think. That's not normal.
Well,
That's
to
not
me,
normal.
it's less to me, it's less the process. But if I can just say something, using
Sure.
Joe's philosophy, which is what the community wants. If you go back, way back, even before when I was on there, like when Gene Ruhlman was in his days, it was all lily white. The whole council was. Okay. By that reasoning, we should only appoint a white person because that's what the community wants. Well, I would think someone at that time who had some sense of who was a progressive and open-minded would say, hey, this isn't really healthy to have all white people, even if that's how the votes went. We should be open to having people who are not white or people who think differently. And so I just respectfully reject this whole idea that, oh, it has to be a white person or has to be a black person, has to be a man, has to be a woman. I think that's bad. That's racist thinking, in my opinion. And that's what I think happened for so many years in this country and in this city on the other side.
Well,
Kevin G, I
I
want
disagree.
to let you get in, Kevin G. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I got a bunch of thoughts. First of all, we need to separate Kevin A's comments about corporate America versus a governmental entity. Usually in the corporate world, when they do a nationwide search or whatever, that's to fulfill the EEOC requirements. Generally, they have somebody in mind that they are interested in hiring, but they go through the process and hire who they want in the first place. I see this, well, a lot of times in corporations, and I especially see it in the radio profession and in the broadcast area, where you go to this nationwide search and you send them all your qualifications and whatever, and they pick somebody else. I mean, it's just, you see that all the time. Now, when it comes to the city of Cincinnati City Council, it's up to one person. They have the determination. Now, she can have this wise counsel, but at the end of the day, when everybody gives their opinion, there's always one person that's the decision maker, and then they make the decision based on all the input. Hopefully they weigh it. But again, as Kevin A said, you always have a certain prejudice. And I think Phil mentioned this. You always have in your mind somebody that you would like to see in that position. And maybe that gives them a leg up from the standpoint that possibly some of the negative criticism that you get from your wise counsel doesn't necessarily make it into your brain because, again, you have some of these preconceived ideas. But I resist this idea that you have to have a black for a black, a white for a white. I mean, I'm getting so tired of everybody being treated like they're a NASCAR stock car where we are all defined by the individual labels on us. A gay man, a straight man, a white man, a black man, an older man, all this kind of things. My question is he qualified? Is he one of the best people that should be on council? And
there were a lot of people. I guess the 6 people were supposed to be qualified. That's how they made it to the final 6, correct?
Right, I guess. Now, as far as your comment, Joe, about that the top 5 vote getters were all African American, well, those are the 5 people that tossed their hat into the ring. A lot of people may look at the city of Cincinnati City Council and say, gosh, this is not the year that I want to jump in. Maybe I'll do it in a couple of years, or maybe I've done it in the past, whatever. So the top 5 vote getters, I don't think is necessarily the criteria of who you choose, that you start at the first one and work your way down the list in terms of the top vote getter. Again, according to the charter and according to the way things are done, it's up to that council member to determine who the replacement would be. And she exercised that. Now, as far as the Inquirer is concerned, I guess we've got the story that talks about the individual notes. but we're not seeing all the notes either. I mean, these are the ones that I guess the Inquirer, and I guess for brevity purposes, I don't know if it would be a 20-page article or whatever, but we're only seeing some of the notes that were done. These may be the more flagrant or headline grabbing, as opposed to some of the other comments that aren't in there that would have maybe had a different light on this. So I'm kind of on the impression of this is that, what is the big deal? I guess. So,
Well, what is the big deal of creating a whole process where these candidates felt that they may have had a chance, and you create a panel of people, to show that you've been thoughtful and you've chosen certain ones to be on there, and they are supposed to be giving you some feedback. And this is all her words that she said previously. She's expecting them to be her wise counsel and to advise her. Now, there's no other conclusion you can come to. Those might be just some of the notes. You're right. But there's only one conclusion you can come to when you read those notes and you see where it's pointing to. Yes, she could have made a decision. Yes, she could have. But if she wanted to make that decision, make the decision. Don't go through this charade.
Well,
I look at this first note that Nathan just put up there. Evan is ready on day one. Shouldn't that be the biggest criteria right there?
Well,
that's her opinion, though. That's the issue.
There you go.
So
it's her opinion, but it's her decision.
You're right. You're absolutely right. So this goes back to what we've been talking about, because this has been a hot topic in Cincinnati, and it comes back to a lot of things we've been saying. I mean, we need to change the process. So part of this is on Mika Owens. The other part is on the citizens of Cincinnati to rise up, coalesce, do what needs to be done to change the charter, so we don't have this situation happen again.
But here's the thing.
Let me finish it, Kevin. And I'm very sympathetic to what Kevin was saying in terms of, Mika Owens is, to some degree, it's somewhat of a disadvantage, but it kind of comes with the territory in the sense of, like, we're getting a chance to see her honest thoughts. And to something Kevin said, like, we all have thoughts that if people heard them, they might give us a second look. So it's a little bit unfair, kinda, but it isn't unfair because you're an elected politician. So I got to question her decision-making and maybe writing all of this down without thinking that it would ever go public, but maybe she never thought it would.
Well, I'll guarantee you the lesson she took from this is keep your personal notes to yourself. Okay, that was the lesson that was learned.
But Joe made an excellent point as well. The process. So you go through all this, because I agree with what Joe is saying. I think it was somewhat of a sham as well.
Let's be honest. Joe is not concerned about the process.
Let me get it all out before.
This is going to get
into. Let me get it all out,
topic
Kevin, before we parse it up. I haven't even said it yet. So I think Joe is right. The impression that I got from reading the notes, right, wrong, or whatever, is that Evan Nolan was her person from day one. Now, I was watching the Lincoln Ware show a couple of weeks ago when Evan Nolan and Mika Owens made an appearance on his show, and he let it drop that she reached out to him. So with all this information and looking at the notes, these may not be all the notes, I can't help but come to the conclusion that she had her guy, and that's what it was going to be. And I'm also concerned with, okay, you've got a council. Do you give them the notes first before they deliberate, or do they give you their notes and then you give them your notes? Because back to what Joe was saying, if Mika puts a crowd of people together, a wise panel, but then you give them these notes,
do we know that's how it happened? Do we know that it happened that way? How do we know that it happened that way?
I'm saying
we don't know that it happened that way.
We don't know that it didn't happen.
Information that I don't have about how these notes were shared with the wise counsel and in what order.
Which means it's a possibility.
I'm not saying that that's not true. I'm saying we don't know. At least I don't know.
Yes, we do know. We do know that. We do know that the wise counsel had the same. They had the same packet that everybody sees. The packet that was shared online is the same packet that the wise counsel had.
Okay. So here's what I'll say. A couple of points that I'll point out, and this will get into a topic that we're going to talk about in the second half of the podcast, especially since we're talking about selection processes and what's a sham and when you've got your person picked. Okay, let's just take CPS, for example. What are they being criticized for right now? For not conducting a process to hire their new superintendent. They had their person.
They're getting jammed
Let me
for not
finish.
being
Let me finish.
transparent.
Let me
They weren't
finish my
transparent.
point. Let me finish my point, Joe, and then I'll gladly let you have the floor. But they're being criticized now because they didn't conduct the process. They said, we got our person, we're going with our person, and this is what it is. And the feedback that they're getting is, with no community input, why not go through a process? So what we're hearing here today is, well, Mika already had her person. Why go through the process? But the school board is saying we already had our person and we didn't go through the process. And so what if they had gone through a process and still arrived at the same person?
This is apples and oranges. This is apples and oranges, Kevin.
Well, we're just talking about processes, and when you've already got somebody in mind who you want. That's what I'm talking. That's the
but that's the only similarities to this, though. That's
Say
it.
Again?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Kevin, but that's the only similarity to what we're talking about with Mika Owens. That's it. I mean,
let me say something if I could.
Processes, but every other context is differently.
All this stuff about, let's be honest, guys, all this stuff about process, that's not really the issue here. And you know, and I know, and this is no disrespect for Joe, but if they had the same process and it was a black guy, he'd be perfectly fine with it. It's a racial,
right.
It has nothing to do,
right.
It has nothing to do with the process. So let's not kid ourselves. He
wanted
a black person. I don't agree. Just a second. I don't agree with that decision that it has to be a particular race, but let's stop pretending it's the process. It's the choice that Joe's not happy with.
Hey, let's not pretend that this
choice.
is a real process. Phil, let's not pretend that there's a real process, okay?
I'm not pretending. I'm saying you don't really care about the process. You care about the race. That's what you care about. That's it.
I'm here talking about black representation. You're right.
And that's why I was saying, Nathan, when we talk about changing the process, I've said this. I don't disagree that the process needs to be changed, but I've said, what are we trying to solve for in the changing of the process? And this is the point that I made last time we talked about this. What we're talking about in this situation is representation. And so that's what Joe's talking about. That's what Joe just said. That's what he just said.
You're right. But let me reiterate, because I remember the conversation. That's what Joe is talking about. My point and my issue is that whatever the charter changes happen, it should be more reflective of the will of the voters. Joe is the president in the NAACP, not me. I'm John Q. Public.
But most of the people who are complaining about it, Nathan, are coming from Joe's perspective. The biggest complaint, and Phil said it. The biggest complaint on this is that Mika did not replace Reggie Harris with a light candidate. That is the argument. Nobody is. I agree with Phil on this point. Is that we would not be talking about the process if it wasn't about the representation.
No,
so
if
representation is the point, then that's what you got to talk about solving for in a process. Because if you don't, I don't care what process you come up with, you're going to still come up with this.
No, that's what
because
you're leaving it talking about. Huh? If a black person had been elected, as I told you last time we talked, I would feel the same way. We need to change the charter so it's more reflective of the will of the voters. Like, we can have multiple issues that are not the same, but maybe they converge on some levels, right? So yeah, what Joe's issue is not the same as mine, but his issue is just as valid as mine. That's all I'm saying. Here's the other issue
I think there's no way. I think there's no way around Nathan. I don't think there's any way around this argument, which I think Phil and Kevin have kind of articulated. You might as well just tell the truth about it. I mean, look, if you had 8 members of city council who were all white, and you had a process, okay, where you had an opportunity to put a minority of whatever situation was that was on there. And even if it was the will of the voters to have another white person on there, you cannot tell me that minority communities in Cincinnati would not have something to say if they put another white person on there when they had an opportunity. If they went through a process and there were black candidates there and a black candidate was not chosen when there's no representation on there, you can't tell me that wouldn't be an issue. I'm not
arguing against that. I'm not arguing against that.
Let me talk about this. So
my piece about it. And my piece is we need to change the charter so it's more reflective of the will of the voters. So if we had changed the charter previous to this situation. And the charter said, look, if somebody leaves city council, you take the next votes getter. That would have been maybe Liz Keating. I would have no problem with that. She's a white Republican, but it's reflective of the will of the voters. That's where I'm coming from. You may be right about the minority community, but so what? I mean, I disagree on that.
Well, we elected officials to represent us and our thoughts and what we are interested in on council, in the county, in the state, in national politics. And when that representative is the voice and they make the decision based on their process, that is in effect the will of the people.
Yeah, you can make that argument.
So let me throw this out there. So, and this is a process that Mika benefited from. The Democratic Party, they try to have a diverse slate. So they try to get this many of this many of that. So they try to make sure that it's a balanced and diverse slate. So
back to the stock car analogy.
Well, Mika, that's your analogy, but Mika was the beneficiary as an African-American female because they had two other ones. So they had three. They were going to put 4 or 5. They were trying to balance out their slate. If she was not one of the endorsed candidates, she wouldn't be on council right now because they showed that the ones who were endorsed, all those people are the ones who got elected. So she was the beneficiary. And then she has to make comments like, I don't do identity politics. That's what she did. She benefited from identity politics and she participated in the identity politics.
Yeah, I thought that comment was I had a real issue with that. I'm like, we playing that game, sis?
Right.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm like, don't do that. But
I got a question about the NAACP, which, as I understand it,
are you a member, Phil? Are you a member? Are you a member of the NAACP?
I was when I was in office. I'm not now.
Well, about 30 years ago?
When I was in public office, I was a member. I was a member of a lot of stuff that I'm not a member of now. So, but I was.
Fair point.
I was.
Fair point.
Anyway. Okay. It seems to me, and obviously I'm not the expert. I'll leave it to Joe to answer this, but it seems to me that the NAACP has a proud, historic tradition of fighting for racial justice. And that to me was and always has been different from just trying to get as many of one race as possible. And I just like Joe to respond to that because I think, frankly, and I don't mean this, I don't mean this disrespectfully. I think your position on this goes against the historic role of the NAACP in this country.
Okay, so, we do change from time to time. We have advanced from 1909 to 2024, right? So the NAACP, they have changed their mission as they've gone through and things have evolved. So let me read the mission of the NAACP for you, since you want to talk about, how it was. This is the mission of the NAACP: to achieve equity, political rights, and social inclusion by advancing policies and practices that expand human and civil rights, eliminate discrimination, and accelerate the well-being, education, and economic security of Black people and all persons of color. Black people and all persons of color. That's in our mission.
So you're not interested in diversity. It's all Black people then.
It's about racial equity. We have been
well, that would exclude whites. If you're talking about on behalf of Black people.
It's about racial equity. Yeah, so that's what it's about.
Okay.
And we're talking about the mission at NAACP. That's what is in alignment with what our position is with this situation.
Right.
Back to Phil's point, because he wasn't Black, you guys are opposed to it.
Yeah, I think he said that.
It's been said over and over again. Yeah. You want me to say it slowly?
Yeah. But let me point this.
You don't have to insult and you don't have to talk slowly. You can talk your mind and I will talk mine. The bottom line, and I asked this from the beginning, is this guy the most qualified?
Well, maybe your hearing aids not working.
He is ready from day one. Period.
Without somebody being a former member of the city council, I don't know how you gauge that. Like how, here you are, you got a council seat open. How do you know whether somebody's the most qualified for a job like this?
That's her opinion. It was her decision, and she made it.
And that's where I say, no matter what process you come up with, Nathan, You got to understand what you're trying to solve for, because this best person for the job is a subjective call. It is in the hands of the person who has to make that call.
And that's the
And as
problem.
long as it's in the hands of one person, that person, you are subject to what that person's views, thoughts, biases, opinions, whatever you have it is.
Absolutely.
And so you've got to live with that. So part of my argument against the process is I don't think this should be the decision of one individual, but that's what people in Cincinnati voted for. That's what's in the charter. Was the decision was made that whoever this council appointee is of the person who's departing has the right to make that decision. I don't think that that's the smart way to do it, because even if you put together a wise council, as she did in this case, it's still her call at the end of the day. And how do you determine, how are you going to tell her who's the right person or who's the wrong person? I mean, if any of us was in that position and was being second guessed about a choice that we made, we would defend against that.
Yeah, but don't imply to the public, don't imply that your wise counsel that you have assembled, you got feedback from them to imply that may have had something to do with the ultimate decision you came up with.
I don't know that Mika Owens ever said that, though. Did she ever say that? I think all she's ever said was, hey, I put together this wise council of people who advised me. She didn't say I was going to take she never said I was going to take their advice or was going to listen to everything
It's inferred. You got these people together for a reason. They give you feedback. It's inferred. So you don't bias a process and taint a process by giving the cheat notes or whatever your personal thoughts are. You let it stand on its own merit. That's my point on the process.
Let me say it disappoints me that, and if I'm pushing this too much, I apologize. It disappoints me. I mean, that in his probably, I guess, most famous speech, Martin Luther King said, something to the effect, I long for a day where my children will not be judged by the color of their skin.
We're still longing for
but by the content of their character. And
everybody likes to use that quote.
We are still waiting for those days.
How about the quote where he says, I think I might have integrated my people into a burning house? How about that?
Hey, I wish I could play emojis on the screen right now. Exactly. But let me bring this up, because I think that Ozzie Davis was a casualty of journalism. Like, for me, I think this was good work by the Cincinnati Enquirer. People were asking about it. They did the public information requests. They got the story. And this was a part of Mika's notes that I don't think a lot of people are talking about. Is she talked about Ozzie Davis, and none of it was flattering, including a comment at the end in which she says, quote, I have also seen him be inappropriate in public with his treatment of women. Now, I haven't talked to Ozzie Davis, but I can imagine that hitting somebody real heavy. And, again, if that's what Mika thinks, that's what she thinks. She is entitled to think what she wants to think. If that was a part of her process, that should be a part of her process. The only thing I would say, and I don't know if it went down like this or not, is that for me, before I would put something like that on paper for other people to consume, if I'm in a process like that, I would have said it directly to his face. I would have brought it up to him face to face, all of my concerns with all of the candidates, so they know where they stand with me. If I'm going to go back and scribble it and give notes to the wise counsel and other people are going to see this, for me, it would just be the right thing to do. I would even say, dare say, professional.
I don't think she expected those notes to be made public.
It doesn't matter. Have that. She knew it was going to be seen by somebody. Tell the candidate that to his face. Tell that to his face. Now, I don't know if she did or not. She may have. If she did, I give her props for that. If she didn't, I don't give you props for that. Just keep it 100.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that, Nathan. I think on that particular point, like that is a particular
only that one, Kevin.
That's a particularly damning statement, and I don't think you put that down on paper in notes without intention, without a purpose. You put that down to send a message to whomever I think is going to be reading that. Now, Mika might be particularly sensitive to that because she's a woman and felt it necessary to include that if that's what she believed or witnessed or thought about Ozzy, which it's important for me to note also in that story, Ozzy commented that he denied that statement. He vehemently denied that
I'm glad
statement
you
or
said that. He did.
that characterization about him. So that's important to note. But I do think she did that with intention. You don't put that down without something like that, without having the intention of, like, I don't just put something like that in my notes for myself if I already feel that way or I already know it. I don't need to confirm that with me. I kind of feel like the stuff that you included in those notes were things that you wanted people to read at some point along the way for some purpose. And so I agree with you on that point, Nathan. I
And she
think
should
that
have
was,
said it to his face.
yeah,
Because I would have.
yeah.
I would
Yeah.
have said
And I'm
it
not saying
in a
that
very
she's not
professional
entitled
way.
to her feelings about that. And if she has seen some things to even talk about that, but I do think that, you should confront an individual, especially about if that is a piece of your process in considering or denying that person. It would have been something I would have asked him about in the interview process. And maybe she did. I don't
Absolutely.
know. Ozzy would have to answer that, or Mika would have to answer that question.
Hey, listen,
Where
OG,
is the
listen,
distinction? Where
I just
does
want
the
to let you know,
distinction
I saw some
between
things,
private
I've got
and
some question
public
marks about you and
notes
some
come
doubts
into play
about you.
here?
So, I just want to bring this up to you and give you a chance to explain it. It's just that simple. To each
Yeah.
and every candidate about each and every issue that you may have. To me, that would just be fair to individuals so that you walk away knowing exactly what the impression was. Like in a situation like this, that's what I think you would owe somebody. Like, you want to sit down and be council person, I'm going to tell you, what I really think about you so that you can grow and develop. And you're not walking away thinking one thing, but it's something completely different. To me, that's just fair, but sounds
Well,
like Kevin, you
the
agree
other
with that.
thing I was thinking about is, like, it's disturbing some of the things she said because somebody was going to see it. She knew that maybe she didn't want the public to see it, but everybody in that room who had those documents, they saw it. So what do you think kind of opinion they're going to form when they read these comments, and they see him in the community?
Yeah.
I
They're
think
going to be looking at him crazy. Side
it's
eye.
disturbing that she would write that without him. Now they see this and people are looking at him differently. He doesn't know that these notes have been shared with people in the Wise Council. So he didn't have to defend himself.
Yeah. And I would say, too, if she doesn't know or anybody on city council doesn't know, that anything that you're doing in an official capacity is part of a public record. And if you put it down on paper and it exists somewhere, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to get public records requested by the media, not just the Inquirer, but other media in the city of Cincinnati. Anybody could have possibly asked for those notes or those public documents. So if she doesn't know, shame on her. She should know. And I do think, I don't know, Phil, you can tell me better, but don't they take you guys through sunshine law education when you get on city council and county commission to educate you on what's public record and what's not?
Well, yes and no, but let's put it this way. All of us remember the famous, who were the guys who got charged with a couple of years ago with whatever they were meeting, I don't know, texting back and forth. We all learned the lesson, basically, is don't write things down that you don't want made public. And I'll guarantee you that's the lesson she learned from this, okay?
Well, it's a lesson she should have already learned. She knows these individuals. She knows the so-called Gang of Five.
Well,
she
know the individual. I believe she
She
had those
replaced
notes.
one, didn't she?
What?
Did she replace one? I can't remember. Was she appointed?
She was elected.
She was elected. Okay. Thank you for the correction. I appreciate it. Well, listen, I just got the word from Irenetta. Unfortunately, she won't be able to join us. And we're about to segue into a conversation about the public schools and the school board. Joe, do you want to stick around? I know you're a busy man. You're more than welcome. It's up to you.
The only thing I don't want to stick around. I was going to comment that from what I've been reading and I've gathered is that, there was expectation of a process and then it kind of was sprung on some folks at the last minute. And yes, it's their right to do what they did, but everyone had the expectation that there would be a national search and all of that, but there was no transparency of that. They were going to call for this vote so you can have opportunity for people to come and weigh in and give their feedback. That's the only thing I would say about that.
Yep. Okay. All right. Well, Joe, thanks so much, man. Phil, any last words you want to say to Joe? And then Kevin,
I have no I think I've made my point clear. And Joe, I appreciate your honesty in, telling us, really what was behind this. I appreciate that and respect that.
All right. Power to the people.
All right. Thanks so much, Joe. Appreciate his time, man. Very, very busy man, Joe Mallory. But I appreciate it. I hit him up last kind of second, last minute, and he was able to come in. And then we now got a chance to have a face-to-face. Phil, you had brought it up some time ago, so I'm glad we got a chance to talk about it. And
Thank you. Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
move on. So, school board. I've got a clip for you. For folks who don't know, the school board this week, they appointed a new superintendent. Her name is Shauna Murphy. She had been the interim. Now she is going to be in a 2-year contract. And they didn't tell anybody. Me personally, I don't believe it. I think the school board already knew that a vote might come up. This is just me. This is my personal opinion. If I had evidence to support it, I'd already be showing it, which would be a violation of some laws, I believe. But let me play this clip for you. This is Kendra Mapp talking about it right before the vote. Check this out.
Motion maker has made the amendment, and at the suggestion of Member Moffett, and the seconder has agreed to the amendment. The question is called, and we're prepared for a roll call. Any last comments? Member Mapp.
Yes, thank you. My last comment will be brief, but I just want to reach out to the community, and I hope that you're paying attention. And I would hope that you all will hold us accountable, because we're talking about making the recommendation for the current interims to serve as the superintendent when we have not even received data that's showing, or outcomes that's showing, any type of success. We had a state of schools address where we didn't even receive information about student outcomes. What it was about was this growth plan. So my plea is to the community to pay attention and hold us accountable.
And we're doing just that, Kendra. We're doing just that. I've got another clip. This is of Brandon Craig. And he is
I
a
just want
member
to
of
reiterate
the
something
board as
here,
well.
though, that I
Check
think
it out. It's a little
is
longer, but it'll add
true. We
context
spent
to the conversation.
10 minutes with both candidates to make a decision on who would be the interim and the deputy interim, or the interim deputy, I'm sorry. That the public needs to know. We spent 10 minutes. And this is not a knock on the interim superintendent or the interim deputy superintendent, because I think both of those two people, quite honestly, you do a short search, they're going to prove to be either the top of the crop or not. So it is not the assumption that we do a search and suddenly we pick somebody different. But for me, for us to sit here and say that we are going to take the time and effort to go through a process to find a replacement for the treasurer, we're going to have time and effort to do a process for a search before, the time and effort to hold meetings and discuss all these other things, and then say we're not going to take the time and effort
To do the most.
to quite honestly if the person is the best candidate, to let them shine, that seems to me to be making a decision that's not necessarily in the best interest. That's the board work not being in the best interest of the district for me. So again, this is not a knock on the effort of the work they're doing, because quite honestly, they've been doing great work without getting the full support in the ways that need to be done, because we should be making the decision about the phase 2 yesterday. And yet we're not. If we really want to talk about stability, that's what we should have been doing the last board meeting, if not this board meeting, because that is what the superintendent asked us to do at the last board meeting, and made an impassioned plea for it. Now, I do want to say again, we're out here doing a search for a treasurer, and we're saying that has to go through a process, even though we have an internal person here. But we're not going to do that for the superintendent with this vote. And so I hear the need for expediency. I hear the need for valuing the culture change and all that. But I also want to point out that doesn't seem to flow in a level of equity that we principally cheer out and principally live upon. So, I mean, for me, my vote will not be a vote against the superintendent, the interim superintendent, or the deputy interim superintendent. It'll be a vote against the board.
A vote against the board. A vote against the board. Some strong language. So as a parent, let me go first. As a parent, I'm absolutely disgusted. I'm disgusted, as one of my former members used to say all the time, at this decision, because I feel left out of it. I get emails about all kinds of stuff about clinic culture, but I don't get a notification even about a conversation. And, I've been doing battle as Nate the Barbarian on my various Facebook streams and accounts. And, you know, people keep trying to make it about Shauna Murphy. Well, the board did this. The board put her in this uncomfortable position, not me. My issue isn't necessarily about her. My issue is that as the most important stakeholder, right, as a taxpayer and a parent of a child in CPS, I want to feel like I'm involved, you know, in the process. We should be involved. All of these people ran on involving parents. And then they get to a point like this and they make a decision. It just felt like it was just a betrayal. There's some other issues, but I want to open up the floor. You know, what do you think about this?
Well, you know, I haven't been a big fan of this school board for a while, because what you saw here was sort of a different variation of exactly what they did when they appointed Shauna Murphy as the interim superintendent. They sort of speed dated through this process. I think you heard board member Craig talk about spending 10 minutes in interviews before appointing her as the interim. And in both situations, in both making her the interim and the permanent, from conversations that I've had, the issue has been timing, a sense of urgency. Hey, we gotta have stability. We gotta get somebody in place immediately after getting rid of Wright, so we don't have time to go through any kind of process. So we got to move quickly to get an interim in. Now they're up against union contract negotiations at the end of the year, legislation that's going on in the state house that could impact schools, budgeting coming up. And so now they're saying, hey, look, this board has already said, hey, we're not going to move on anything until we move on a new superintendent. So we're not going to vote on anything. We're not going to approve anything or allow the interims to really do anything of substance until we have a superintendent in place. And so now the thought process is well, we've got all of these things coming up. We need a permanent superintendent in place quickly. And because we've wasted the last 6 months and have not begun a search or even, you know, had conversations about putting together a search, now our backs are up against the wall. And so we got to get somebody in place so we can have somebody and make these decisions. So it's sort of this sense of like, you know, making these decisions under duress. And I think it's and I wrote this at the time when they appointed Shauna Murphy as interim. I said, I hope they're setting her up for success and not just setting her up. And I said at that time that the board wasn't off to a good start in doing that, in setting her up for success. And they still aren't. And I think it's totally unfair to Shauna Murphy, the position that they've put her in, the position that she had to sit there and watch 3 people who she has to work for, who by their no votes. I know what Brandon Craig said about this is not a vote against her, but it's hard not to feel that way when it's you. And so I'm sure she had to be deflated by the fact that said, look, I don't have the complete and full support of this board even going into the door. So I think what you see here is a product of a dysfunctional board that does not trust each other. Look, don't get it twisted. These folks on this school board do not trust each other. They don't trust each other's motives, and that is not working in the best interests of the public or of the kids in Cincinnati public schools. You can't have a board that's divided this way, where board members don't trust each other and they're not on one accord pulling in the same direction for the students. This is what you wind up with.
Anybody want to jump in?
Yeah, you can kind of almost weave a thread going back to that board meeting a couple of months ago, talking about the kids going to these bus stops and the police chief showing up there, and the behavior of the school board that day kind of seemed like they were ineffectual or not very, in my opinion, competent. Then you go to this meeting here where you just mentioned that it seems like the board doesn't trust each other and so on. We can tie kind of a thread to the previous story where the fact that what we just discussed is that some of these people on the board had a preconceived idea of who they wanted, and they weren't going to be influenced by doing a nationwide search. They weren't going to look here. They weren't going to look there. Their minds were already made up. And so there's an issue there as far as the board is concerned. But the fact that this board had since May, as Kevin Aldridge mentioned, what, 6 months to even begin a search. I mean, rather than hitting the ground on day one and saying, this is what we're going to do, here's the criteria, go out as a company would normally do and say, all right, here are your requirements and here are your, here's what we want, on your resume and so on, and do a search and anybody that wants to apply. But this comment, like what the second paragraph, for starters, she never applied and nobody else did. I'm wondering obviously that I would think that within the education community, there is an education newsletter or an education magazine that goes around. And when the story hit that somebody has resigned, when Ironetta resigned, wouldn't you think that the people that would possibly be interested in that would have contacted, initially sent a letter to the Cincinnati Public Schools? What is the process? I think I'd really be interested in this. And how would the process work? And how can I jump on this ahead of time? And the fact that nobody's done that, either that speaks to, I guess, the people that would, to quote, be qualified for this, their lack of initiative, or the fact that maybe the Cincinnati Public Schools has such a bad reputation that nobody wants to be involved with it. I don't know. But the whole process is weird. The fact that, Nathan, you mentioned that it wasn't transparent, and something as high profile as this, that's something that involves the next generation or our kids that everybody talks about are our treasure. And this is how we treat them. This is because we don't, it's like, how important are our kids when we see stuff like this?
Wow.
Yeah.
There he is. That's the guy I know.
Hey, look,
There he
hiring
is.
a superintendent.
So which one of your kids do you want me to be godfather for?
You can both of them, man. You can be Uncle Kevin. You can be your MAGA uncle.
There you go.
MAGA Uncle Kevin.
Uncle MAGA.
Hey, Nathan, hiring a superintendent is the most important job that the school board is. Well, I shouldn't say the most, but it's one of the most important responsibilities that the school board has, is hiring the person who's going to lead the district. And the fact that it was done in this manner, look, surprises are great for birthdays. They're not great for hiring your top executive, right? And the fact that everybody, including the candidate themselves, was surprised that they got the job at this last meeting says that there is something problematic. Look, I've spoken to some people on this, and there was no coming into that meeting with an expectation that a motion was going to be made to vote for a superintendent. Now, there have been temperature checks to find out where everybody was and what their thinking was. But my understanding in the conversations that I've had was, coming into that, no one was expecting a motion to be made for that vote to happen. That's what I'm being told.
Kevin, I reveal no sources ever. But if I knew about it shortly before,
But in this case,
hold on, Seth. If I knew about it shortly beforehand, you better believe those board members knew about it. And I'm not even on the board. So how is that even possible?
Well, I'm not saying that there might not have been a couple of people who had maybe putting their heads together and said, hey, this is what we're going to do. But clearly there were a number of people who didn't see this coming. I'm not saying that this might not have been the machinations of one or two board members. But I'm saying that there were a number of board members who were caught off guard by that. And that speaks to the dysfunction, why there's mistrust among the board members. Because first of all, if you feel like you got to spring this on your colleagues to try to get it through, that says something about the dynamics that are at play, and the fact that you don't trust the people that you're serving with there. Because I don't want to, whether it's an executive session or someplace, even say, hey, you know what? I think I'm about to come out and I'm going to make a motion to make this person the superintendent. if I don't trust that I can have that conversation with you, I'm not going to have it there. I'm just going to come out and I'm going to drop it. I'm going to drop it in the public forum, and then, hey, we'll see what happens, right? And I think that's exactly what you got there.
No, you said some things that really got my wheels spinning. Like when you said this board doesn't trust each other and don't trust their motivations, I can see that now. I'm like, oh, that's what I've been looking at. And you know what? I am less concerned about Shauna Murphy personally and how she feels about it, and I'm more concerned about having a superintendent that has the power, right? Because in a perfect situation, you want a 7-0 vote. That sends the right message to the district and the entire community. And not teeing her up properly means, and I fear it'll have a trickle down effect to the children and to the parents and to the staff. So, this board, man, has leaves a lot to be desired. But Phil, go right ahead. I didn't mean to step on your toes there. Go ahead.
No, I was actually then I was making a little joke, but I don't have, frankly, this is not an issue I've been following that closely, and I'm not that familiar with the process. The only point I'd make, which touches on a tangential issue here, of the idea of whether you hire somebody in the system or you have a nationwide search. One of the books that has had a big influence on me through the years is a book called Good to Great, which some of you may have read. If not, I highly recommend it. And by a guy who carefully compared 10 companies and one that half 10 in one field. 10 that were very successful in different fields and 10 that just not as successful. And they would be like Walgreens, CVS, and so forth and so on. And among other qualities that he explained that the really successful ones was they hired from within, not bringing someone from the outside. I don't say that's an ironclad rule, but I do think it's an interesting point in terms of success. It changed my whole outlook on things in terms of organizations and who's the best person to lead it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was on face. Go ahead, Kevin.
Well, it almost to a certain extent is common sense, because if you've got a culture, if you've got not culture, but if you've got a business, then you want people that are intimately knowledgeable of that business. And you want the people that understand that business. You want to know the people that are pushing that company in the right direction. And you would think that you would want those people to hire from within, as opposed to bringing somebody outside that would possibly disrupt things and may not know anybody and spend a vast majority of, or the first 6 months or so just trying to get to know who the people are before they make any major decisions. So yeah, it would make sense to hire from within. But I want to mention something, and Phil, you mentioned talking about this. Remember Carl Icahn back in the 80s and with the junk bond era, where they do the corporate raids. They would try to take over a corporation. They really didn't want to take over the corporation, but the corporation would then buy their stock back at a premium, and they would go on and raid another corporation. He was like
Gordon Gekko.
Yeah, pretty much, along those lines. But what was interesting that Carl Icahn has now kind of rebranded himself. And he made an interesting comment back when the housing crisis came about and the stock market was in the tank. And he was talking about these corporations. And he said, the problem with a lot of these CEOs is that it's kind of like, and I was never a member of a fraternity, nor would I want to be a member, but at some of these fraternities, he says, you always have this one guy that's been there. He's like been at school for 6 or 7 years. He's the guy that's always gracious. He's always, having the parties. He's the fun guy that everybody wants to talk to. And yet he's the president of the fraternity. And in business, it comes to that where somebody is, working the system, being friends with everybody, and he becomes the president or the CEO, when really he may be as dumb as a box of rocks. And so going back to, we can tie this back even to what we were talking about a few weeks ago about what the Bath and Body Works decision with the candle, that people in the corporate mentality, they don't feel as though that if I speak up, I'm going to get canned. So I'm going to go along to get along and be that person. And so, you see these kinds of things, and I think it's kind of indicative of the school board here as well, that they have the people that they want, or that they don't feel as though that they need to do a process, or I don't know what the hell's going through their mind, because apparently you just, a 10-minute process, you go in and you dump this on everybody, and this is what you come up with. To Phil's point also, one of the funny things is about some of these corporations is that the founding person of those corporations, I don't think Mr. Gamble or Mr. Proctor could ever get hired by Procter & Gamble today, because they're too innovative, they're too forward thinking, they're too much of a rebel, whereas a lot of these corporations want yes man, they want people that go along and don't buck the system. So it's an interesting dynamic, and I think maybe some of these 4 members on the school board didn't want somebody that would rock the boat, that would go along with what, I don't know.
They said they wanted stability. I mean, they've said that time and again, and I think for them, stability represents someone who's been here, someone who knows the culture, who knows the people, someone who's been on the job for the last 6 months. So I think when they see stability, when I think they see trying to get the board back on track, I think that's why the 4 members who voted for Shauna Murphy voted for her, because that's what they see. That's what they see as the stability. And again, this notion of needing to move forward on trying to get some things done that they need to get done here in fairly short order, or at least start getting to it pretty quickly. And with some members of the board saying that they weren't going to do that until they had a new superintendent in place, I think all of those things came together in a mix that led to this hasty decision. My argument is it didn't have to be a hasty decision. They should have started as soon as they made the decision to get rid of Ironetta. Now some might tell you, well, we spent the last few months cleaning up that mess that she left us, right? That may be the argument, is we've had to be focused on that, filling budget deficits, making cuts, and trying to get the budget situated. And that's been the primary focus. And so the superintendent search went to the back burner. But my thing is, you got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. You got to be able to do those things. And then you got to be able to also sort of launch a process to try to find your new leader as well. And I think it's unacceptable to find yourself 6 months later in a position where now you're saying you feel you have to make a rush decision because of these factors that are coming up. That is a failure of the entirety of the board. I'm not just going to even put it on the 4 who made the vote. I'm going to put it on the 3 who voted no, because what have they been doing? What is every member of that board been doing for the last 6 months that nobody has brought forth anything to talk about this process, how it's going to be laid out, how it's going to be executed, so that we don't find ourselves here in mid-November, late November, making a rush decision because we got a bunch of other stuff that's now coming up and you're feeling the
How often do they meet? How often does the board meet?
I'm not sure, but maybe a couple. Do they meet? A couple times a month, maybe, or once a month? I'd have to go back and look. I'm not.
Either way, they've had either 7 opportunities or 14 opportunities, if it's twice a month, for somebody to say, where are we in this hiring process? What have we done? What are we going to do to replace the superintendent? What is the process? What has been done? Are we doing in kind of maybe there should have been a vote even back then? I mean, is this something that has to be done as far as the board is concerned, to say, here is the process that we're going to go for, and it's got to be a nationwide process. We've got to do this. We've got to fulfill these requirements, and let's go forward with it. And I'm sure that there's some sort of as far as the board members are concerned, a search committee or something. I mean, every one of these boards have committees for this, all kinds of different committees that everybody sits on, the budget or maintenance or whatever. But isn't there a committee that is in charge of the hiring process or doing the search? Again, as you mentioned, Kevin, this is almost laughable if it weren't so serious, because again, we're talking about our kids. We're talking about our most precious commodities. We're talking about kids that are going to be the future leaders, and to not have somebody there that has their goals, their ambitions, their aspirations at the top of their list, it's incredible. It's like the whole board ought to resign.
I think you're right. Going back to Kevin A, and the board said they wanted stability, but if that's the case, they did a poor job of it, because I don't think anybody thinks that Shauna Murphy is starting with a sound foundation. I mean,
not with a 4-3 vote.
Yeah, a 4-3 vote, and then she only got a 2-year leash. She got 2 years. And then you also next year, and that means right now, they got this big growth plan, which people are already criticizing, saying that it's racist and classist. So now she's going to be the face of that with a 4-3 vote on her and a 2-year leash. I mean, what are we doing?
Yeah.
What are we doing?
I almost think that she would have sat there and go, wait a minute. you want who? You voted on who? Who, me?
Yeah, I was looking for that. Because I don't think that Shauna Murphy knew, but I don't know what she knew or didn't know. So let me take that off the table. But, there was a part of me, and maybe this is too altruistic, who felt like she should have said, look, this ain't the right way to do it. I appreciate this. Let's go through a process, and I'll win it. Right? Now, I know that is only in the movies, Kevin A. I can see you already. Like, man, people ain't going to do that. People ain't going to do that. But I'm just saying, there's a part of me that felt like she should have said that. And then now I'm like,
Shauna Murphy goes to Washington.
Now I'm like, okay, sis, I like you coming in.
But I think if you already feel like, which I'm sure she probably does, if you already feel like you are the best person for the job, and they're going to give it to me, no, I'm not going to turn it away and say, nah, make me go through a process and just so I can prove that I'm the best person for that job. No, nobody is going to do that. I mean, I'm sure she already feels in her heart of hearts and in her mind that she's the right person to do the job and that she can do the job. And hey, this is an opportunity of a lifetime. It's her chance to prove, in granted a very short window, that she has what it takes to lead this district, and she's going to have that opportunity. I think what's unfair about it is that she does now have to deal with these questions from people about her qualifications, about whether she's the best person. Because to your point, if you do go through a process and you do emerge as the best person, you can at least say, of those who came for this job, I emerged as the top choice out of that. And you can weather a little bit more criticism that might come your way, whether that's from the board or the public or whatever, because you went through the process. She hasn't done that. And so now I think everything that she does that is not agreed upon or is seen as a failure is going to be magnified because of this process that the board elected not to do.
Well, since she was appointed interim, has there been any
you guys still here?
Has there been any like major accomplishments? Has there been any aha things that she's done? Has there been any positive things that people could point to and say, hey, we're heading in the right direction and we need to continue this? Or has it been kind of a status quo all along?
I missed all of that because I was having some connection.
I was going to say that since Shauna was appointed interim superintendent, what has been the track record up to this point? Has there been something that has happened that people said, wow, that's a great idea, or this was a great innovation, or that this appears as though we might be heading in the right direction with this, and then would give her the boost to become made permanent? Or has it just been kind of things on an even keel? What's that?
I'm having some issues hearing you, but I think I get that's a very fair question. And those are the questions that parents have. Like, as a parent, I want to know, what have you seen from Shauna Murphy so far? Because she's been with the district, which is a failing district for years and years and years. What has she done to demonstrate, either through policy programs or whatever, that is going to take this district to the next level? That is a very fair question. And that's what they didn't want us to ask about her. They wanted to rush it through. Don't ask any questions. Okay, maybe she don't have a PhD, so maybe she doesn't compete with the type of candidate that's out there. We want her, that's it. And that's what I think it was all about, if you guys can hear me.
Yeah,
I think
I can
that's
hear
a
you.
fair question.
Yeah, I think in fairness to her, though, you've got to understand that with that interim tag and with the approach that the board has really been kind of taking, like, she hasn't really had the license to do much. I mean, other than kind of more or less mind the shop, because you've got a board that's not voting on anything. She's not able to come in and sort of set goals or vision because she's in the interim position, right? Like those are things that are sort of reserved for the person who's going to be taking your district forward. So I think that, and I don't know, like, if there are any specific things that we can point to, as you said, that I think that's a byproduct of not having the process. But I also think that that her hands haven't necessarily been freed. I think they've been tied to some degree, again, by this board and the way that they've chosen to kind of move forward or not move forward until they got a permanent superintendent pick in place. So this is why I say I think the whole process is unfair to her, to Shauna Murphy.
If we could put this on a sports analogy.
But I don't care about Shauna Murphy. I care about the parents. The whole process is unfair to parents.
Yeah, I get that, Nathan. I get that. But the question was specifically about her. So that's what I was responding to. It's not that I'm saying
I get it.
Parents.
But I want to challenge one of your points. You're right. Not really a challenge. You're right. She's only been the interim for 6 months now, and her hands have been tied. But my question is, what have you done in your CPS career?
35
That's my question. You've been there for 20 years. What have you done? What have you demonstrated? Why are you the next person? Right? That's what would have came out in the interview. The interview also would have gave her a chance to collect her thoughts and present a plan for what she sees for the next level. So yeah, I mean, I think they did her dirty. But by extension, they did us dirty.
Yeah.
Parents.
Well, Nathan, to your point, when you said, what has she done? What the article said, she's been with the system for 35 years. Is that?
Yeah, she's been there for a while.
Okay. And you said, what has she done over her career that I would have hoped that the board would have looked at that when they appointed her the interim superintendent, that something she did in 35 years demonstrated to them that she had these qualifications. And on a sports analogy, if you will, I would think that when you have a first string quarterback and he gets injured and you've got somebody that is second string and people are thinking, well, he's really not up to the task and all this sort of stuff, and we're going to make sure that we either draft or we're looking forward to the future, that would be his opportunity to shine and say, well, here's what I can do, and I'm going to prove to you that I'm the person. So whether there's a mandate or not, interim or not, there should have been something at 35 years that she saw that, hey, let's do this. I've been wanting to do this. Let me show you what I can do, and do it. Rather than just, well, I'm just going to limp along here and be that friendly person that the board likes, and then they will hire me, whether or not that's for the benefit of you as a parent, Nathan, or our children. And that's probably one of the things that's one of the most frightening things. Is this, is the school board really interested in making sure that our kids are educated properly? And you mentioned a failing system. I remember when I was doing the radio show down in Little Rock, Arkansas, I think one of the things that really upset the people down there when they were talking about education and they were talking about some of the changes they wanted to make. And I said, the motto of Arkansas school system should not be "Thank God for Mississippi." You should want to expand and not be you should not be satisfied with being 49. Maybe you want to start shooting for 48, 47 and go on up. And man, did that start a lightning storm. And so you think? So with a system of being failing for a number of years, you would think that at some point in time they would say, again, we thank God we're not number 10 or whatever the number is. I mean,
do you guys have like 8 more minutes? Because I want to get your impression about
I got plenty of time. My system is charged. I bought an extra charger, so
Oh, I'm
I don't
glad.
run out of
I'm
time.
glad. Taking
You
it
guys
seriously.
are
Kevin,
in
you
trouble.
went.
I'm
Kevin,
happy
you
to
really
go.
splurged.
Hey, Trump,
This is
Trump
really
gets elected,
exciting.
and all of a sudden, Kevin's got
Wow.
extra battery packs and
Yeah.
everything,
Wow,
man.
you got money to
You would not have
spare,
bought
man.
those
You must have
batteries.
partied. It's part of partying, I guess, after the
It's
election. You get a
it's
charger.
my it's
Other
my
people drink, he
contribution
gets a
to make
charger.
Hot Mike great again.
There it is. There it is. I like that. But I want to have at least one more topic. And then Kevin told me a really cool story that I wanted, if you don't mind, Kevin A, if you would mind sharing with them when he was at the Bengal game. But my question is real kind of open-ended. What is your impression of Trump's cabinet picks?
Is this a serious segment or is this like a comedy segment?
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. You go ahead, Phil.
Well, I mean, I think they speak for themselves. To tell you the truth, you've got the guy who sliced up the bear and left him in Central Park, who's basically
RFK.
What's that?
RFK.
I hope there's not another person that's done that.
Right.
I was basically, I mean, as far as I can tell, every legitimate scientist and medical person in the medical field considers him a complete quack. Didn't he say that?
I consider most of the medical
me.
profession to be quacks, honestly.
Well, I'll, not to drop names, I come from a medical family. And my father was always critical of it, but I think to say that the
maybe you should
chemicals,
take that same skepticism.
to say that the chemicals in the water are causing boys to become gay, I think that's a bit of a stretch, okay? And keep something in mind, this guy has no background whatsoever in these things he talks about. He was an environmental lawyer. It's not like he went to medical school or even took a science course, okay? And I believe he was also a heroin addict.
I'm sure he took a few science courses along the way, Phil.
I mean, well, I would think somebody who's head of HEW, Health and Human Services, I think you want somebody with a little background in the subject as opposed to a guy who's basically a quack who comes out with theories that are totally debunked. So, no, okay. So that's him.
No, they're not totally debunked, Phil. That might be in your brain, but not necessarily debunked.
Break it down to the simplest
Are
compound.
our kids healthy today compared to 40 years ago?
Kevin G. He was already starting.
All right,
Yeah,
go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, like, since this has been the crux of what we've been talking about today is like these hires, these appointments, and qualifications. Look, the bottom line is that the cabinet picks that we've seen so far, nobody in any serious-minded individual could look at any of the folks that Trump has picked for major positions right now and say that these are folks who are qualified. You got a Fox News host that you're talking about putting in charge of the intelligence agency. You've got Tulsi Gabbard
Defense Department.
Everything that's going on with her. Like, none of look, whether you're a Trump supporter or not, look, the guy won. He's in there now. So we can afford to have a little bit of honesty here now. You don't have to defend everything that he does. And so, like, serious-minded people have to look at these appointments. I mean, Matt Gaetz, my God, a drug-using, teen sex as a general. I mean, like, one has to question, and I've questioned all along, Trump's competency, his decision-making, which is why I said he wasn't fit to be president. But these picks should scare the hell out of anybody who's looking at them. They're not the picks of a serious-minded individual, someone who is seriously interested. Now, if you're interested in carrying out instruments, you should give them the job well done, Donald. But if you're serious about our national security, our health, our public health, and all of these other situations, you don't put Dr. Oz and you don't put RFK Jr., you don't put Matt Gaetz in charge of the Department of Justice. These are just ridiculous appointments, and people do themselves a disservice by trying to defend them.
Okay, let's talk about Robert F. Kennedy for a moment. Okay, Robert F. Kennedy. I have never had anything. I want to have anything to do with a Kennedy. I've always thought that a lot of the people in the Kennedy clan were useless, were a bunch of rich kids type of thing. But And when I saw some of the stuff that Robert F. Kennedy did as far as being an environmental lawyer, there was a lot of things that I was impressive by that. But when he started talking about vaccines and when he started talking about some of the stuff that's going on, and when he points out the fact that 50% of the FDA's budget is done by the food industry, the chemical companies, and the medical community, that, would you expect the EPA's 50% of their funding to come from the coal industry? And the fact that there are so many of these lobbyists that go in and out of big pharma into the FDA and then back out of the FDA into big pharma. The fact that you look at some of these vaccines, and when we were kids, I don't know what ages you guys are all, and I think we're all within about 20 years of each other. But at one point, Phil, I know you're kind of long in the tooth, but when we were kids,
He just drags you in, Phil.
Excuse me.
Yeah, but when we were kids,
Hold it, just a second. That is age discrimination right there. Did you guys
That's
hear
fine.
that?
Come on in here with me.
No,
Phil.
take me to open mic HR,
He's
okay?
suggesting I'm on.
So,
Just a second.
But
He's suggesting
when we were
I'm on the
kids,
he's
we got
suggesting
what,
I'm on
17
the- excuse me.
vaccines?
Let me just respond. He's suggesting I'm on the back nine, and that's a blow to my heart. I just want to say
All right,
that. But
maybe you're on the back
continue.
eight. But anyway,
All right.
but when you look at the number of vaccines that we have had when we were kids versus the number of vaccines today, I mean, you look at, do you really need I'm trying to think, do you really need a vaccine against chicken pox, for crying out loud? Do you need a vaccine against some of these other diseases that we had as kids that it was part of the rite of passage?
Yeah, like polio. So what's a big deal about polio? I agree with you.
The difference between polio and chicken pox, you're going to make that analogy. Phil, sometimes,
big a deal.
sometimes I think your mind, anyway. But anyway, the fact is that when you look at what's going on as far as kids today, when you look at the amount of autism in kids versus you would want to ask the question. You would want to say,
but you might want to answer it scientifically without guessing at it.
But the scientific community, community that gave us a pandemic, is that the community you want to talk about? You want to talk about Anthony Fauci with his gain of function supporting that,
sorry,
and then saying that, oh no, this didn't come from Wuhan. That guy is a criminal. The fact that he has foisted upon the world this COVID virus, which he knew where it came from, and lied about it.
At least he doesn't. At least Fauci. Let me say. At least Fauci doesn't have a worm in his brain. Okay, that I'll say.
Hey, Kevin. So what?
You don't know that for sure.
Of Trump's cabinet, what's your general impression of Trump's cabinet?
When I heard Matt Gaetz's name floated versus some of the things, and then I started reading more about him. When you have a guy who has been investigated by the FBI, and we've seen how the FBI will go after anybody as far as the deep state and how bad the FBI has been, when they investigate him for 2 years and come up with no evidence of the allegations that are against him.
Who for 2 years and came up with no evidence? I know you're not talking about Trump. There's plenty of evidence.
The FBI investigated Matt Gaetz for 2 years. There was this ongoing investigation.
They decided not to prosecute him, and he's probably lucky.
Well, they decided not to prosecute Hillary Clinton too, and I think she's guilty as hell. But when you say that there's all this evidence and stuff, well, if you can't prove it in a court of law, why do you just besmirch somebody?
There's a difference. There's a difference, Kevin. As a former prosecutor, I can tell you that what they said was, it wasn't that he didn't do it. It was that they were relying on witnesses who they didn't think would be credible enough to convince a jury. And here's the key words: beyond a reasonable doubt. Right. That's a lot different from saying that he didn't. That's a lot different from saying he didn't pay women to have sex. And by the way, it has now come out that there were girls who testified under oath in front of that committee that said he did pay them to have sex, and he paid a 17-year-old to have sex, and one of them even saw him doing it.
Well, then, if they're not, then why aren't they credible witnesses?
Well, because people who are prostitutes and people who do drugs and people who live certain lifestyles, when they get in front of juries,
who perform sex for money, generally are not good
They
witnesses.
don't play well in front of juries.
So you believe the allegations, but you don't believe the person that's making the allegation.
Why do you think you know why he resigned? It isn't just that he had trouble with the Republican senators. As the New York Times actually pointed out today, he was faced with a choice. When he testified, he either was going to perjure himself, which he didn't want to do, or he was going to say, yeah, I did pay these women for sex. And either way, he was in big trouble.
And Kevin, nobody in Congress liked this dude. Like, he literally had no one who liked him. He's kind of like Ted Cruz in a way. It's like it's pretty hard to create a situation where nobody likes you. And I think as a country, we got to get past this point. We got to get past this point because of our politics. This is frustrating. Whether you're liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat or independent, like, we got to get past this point of where we are defending people who are not honorable, who do indefensible things because we want to hold on to our political position, or we think it's going to hurt somebody whom we like. This is the kind of, like, Matt Gaetz is a bad dude, and we need to stop trying to make excuses or give him the benefit of the doubt and all of this type stuff. This is a guy who admitted to his fellow Congress people that he snorted, that he crushed and other things. Young, like, that is not any Republican or Democrat, regardless of which party that we're a part of, to
really
say is
up,
honorable
Kevin.
and something that we should be defending.
Well, and let's look at this current cabinet that we have in office now. What
We don't
brilliance have they done?
Criticize because we don't want to criticize Donald Trump. We'll stand up to people who should not stuff. And then
Okay, well, let's look at the current cabinet. Was Pete Buttigieg qualified for a transportation secretary? Has Alejandro Mayorkas been a great a border person?
Yeah, he has.
Has Rachel Levine been a great HHS person? Has Anthony Blinken been a great Secretary of State? Or have these guys
He's been pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, we're on the verge of World War
good.
III. I'd say that's a failure right there.
How are we on the verge of World War III?
Well, you've got the Middle East blowing up. You've got the Hamas.
Middle East has always been blowing up for 40 years.
You've got now Russia that has invaded Ukraine, which should never have happened in the first place.
Well, that's why we support.
That's
why we support Ukraine.
You've got Britain's missiles and American missiles flying into Russia, and
Let me
Russia
ask
saying
this
we have the
question.
right to hit NATO.
I love when people bring those situations up. Kevin, short of putting U.S. troops in the Middle East or in Ukraine, which we're not going to do, what do you think the United States could do?
The hell we weren't going to be putting people in NATO.
To stop a foreign actor who's intent on doing something. There's nothing that the United States could have done to stop Hamas from attacking Israel.
NATO.
No, there wasn't anything Israel did. There wasn't anything Israel did to stop Hamas from attacking Israel.
So what was the United
States supposed to do?
Trump doesn't believe in NATO, so don't get in trouble.
If Israel could not stop Hamas from attacking them, what was
the
United
States? Are we going to talk about Israel, or are we going to talk about? Are we going to talk about Israel?
You're talking about World War III breaking out.
Let's talk about Israel.
What was the United States supposed to do? Donald Trump was going to stop Russia from invading Ukraine.
You want me to tell you what the United States could have done to prevent Hamas from doing this? Are you ready?
Yeah.
You want me to answer the question? All right. Number one, you don't stop the energy production and rely on your foreign adversaries to provide oil and make them rich. You don't let Iran become a major player in the oil industry where they have gobs of money, so now they can fund Hamas and they can fund Hezbollah and they can fund the Houthis. Hamas has been doing nothing to improve the lives of the people in the Gaza for years. They tear up the roads, they tear up the pipes and make missiles out of them and fire those into Israel. They are being funded by Iran. So if you stop the funding, then they don't have the money, or they cannot distribute the money or the weapons to Hamas in order to attack Israel. So if you don't have weapons to attack, then it wouldn't have happened. So under the scenario of making sure that Iran, who was on the verge of economic collapse prior to the Biden administration coming into office, because they weren't selling their oil, they were under sanctions. And with this administration allowing them to get hundreds of billions of dollars over the last 4 years, then they can fund their terrorist networks around the world. And so, yeah, that's where you stop that from happening.
But the Biden administration did that. Under Biden-Harris, oil production, U.S. oil production has surged. They did what you said.
That is all well and good, but what happened to the oil production as far as Iran and OPEC? When oil was back in 2020, was down around $50 a barrel, Russia and Iran were not making enough money because nobody drills for oil cheaper, cleaner, and more efficient than what we do in the United States.
But
So
give the Biden administration credit. I mean, short of bombing OPEC, which is not going to happen, or bombing the oil production stations that are based in Iran, all we can do is produce more oil. That's what Republicans used to
But we
criticize.
don't allow
That's what
Iran
Biden
to
did.
sell their oil on the
That's
open
what
market.
Biden did. We handle what we can handle. Other people handle what they can handle.
There were
Oil production
sanctions,
has surged.
Nate. There were sanctions on Iran to where they couldn't sell their oil. Oil at $50 a barrel back in 2020, they were not making enough money. They were having economic problems. And when you have economic problems, you're not worried, you're not trying to fund terrorist organizations around the world. But when oil got up to 70, 80, 90, $110 a barrel, they were making a hell of a lot of money. And whether we keep producing oil or whatever, and we increase our production, the fact that these people were making a lot of money, and then instead of being controlled.
We'll come back to this conversation. But Kevin A has to roll out. Kevin, you got time to tell that story real quick before you roll out?
Yeah, no, I do real quick. So this past weekend, my wife and I, we went to Los Angeles for the Bengals Chargers game, and we went with a bunch of folks from Cincinnati who were part of a travel group who went out to the game. And there was a spot, outside of the stadium, a restaurant just a few blocks away from the stadium where most of us were gathering to tailgate before the game. And a couple of ladies walked up to me. I didn't know them personally. I never met them before. And the first thing they say is not anything about, the Cincinnati Enquirer or anything or any of the other, things that people might know me from. The first thing that they talked about was how big of fans they were of Hot Mike. And then they proceeded probably for the next 10 to 15 minutes to talk about every single member of the
Did
crew.
they say anything about the rest of you or just me?
No, well, Phil, you got some talk time, but Kevin was obviously the biggest, most popular part of the conversation. People love Kevin Gordon and his hot takes. So we spent a lot of time talking about Kevin but no, they really talked about how they love the show, how they listen in. And then they wanted to tell me about all of their political points of view about different things we had talked about on the podcast. And so it was a really gratifying moment, I think, for Hot Mike, because it said to me that, hey, people are listening. They're enjoying the content. They're enjoying.
Were they from Cincinnati or were they?
Yeah, they were in Cincinnati. They were from Cincinnati.
Okay.
And they enjoy the different personalities and perspectives that everybody brings to the table. And it was just a good thing. It was a good thing that because people who know me, who see me, who recognize me, they talk to me about a lot of different things. But it was kind of cool.
That's
for the
cool.
first time to have that be Hot Mike experience. So,
and what's interesting about those situations, Kevin, is when it's unsolicited. I mean, you would almost expect your friends to come up and say, "Oh, Kevin, you're the greatest," and all this sort of stuff. But when somebody takes the time to come up to you and say, "Hey, I really like this Hot Mike thing," that is a feather, Nathan, in your cap and everybody's cap. The fact that unsolicited, people that don't necessarily need to say it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Kevin G, I know you know this, man, because you've been doing this as long as I've been doing this. So that's not a small thing. And I told Kevin A that, of course, that's not lost on him at all.
No.
But yeah, that means a whole lot. And I hate to say names unless I remember every name, but do you remember any of the ladies' names?
Yeah, one of the ladies' names was Angel, and I can't remember the other lady's name. Who was there? In fact, the other lady, I should have gotten her name. I should have clarified and got her name because we actually spent the most time talking. Angel was trying to get into the conversation, but it was kind of like a hot mic episode. Sometimes it was kind of hard to get in because everybody had something to say. So. But yeah, no, it was great, and I really do appreciate those ladies for coming up and sharing that.
Well, Angel, we love you.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for her time. Renetta wasn't able to make it with us. I mean, with this conversation would have been perfect for her. But perhaps next week, and I'll get with everybody and see what your holiday schedule is looking like. We'll kind of figure that out. I really appreciate everybody, strong flows and opinions as always. And to the listeners, thank you for checking us out. You're so busy. You're just taking a couple minutes or even more than that to spend with us. That means a whole lot. So, Angel, to your friend, we appreciate you. And to all the people out there that check us out, we appreciate you. Have a great weekend. And
to friends and frenemies alike.
And happy thanks. May I say happy Thanksgiving to all of you and your family.
Absolutely.
And I hope you all overeat and overindulge on that turkey.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, now that inflation's going down, maybe we can afford to get that turkey now.
You just gotta pick and choose. That you gotta put your list together, and you gotta check and see what Rumpke's prices are, Walmart's prices, Kroger, Fresh Time. You gotta do them all, and just plan your shopping excursion carefully. So.
Hey, listen, Kevin G, you can already see where the winds are blowing. If by March of 2025, if inflation has not gone down, if food prices have not gone down, you are going to pay hell on this show. So just get ready.
I better be paying 50 cents for gas come this time next year.
I'd be happy if it got down to $2.19 a gallon, which is where it was in this time back in 2020. When, by the way, we were energy independent for the first time since 1949.
That's all spin. That's all cap. Listen, thank you guys. Have a great day.
All righty.